Good evening. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi travels through Europe, governments are rolling out the red carpet. But the media continues to view India through a narrow and coloured prism. We examine the headlines in the German press and how the narrative clashes with what the country's leaders are saying about India. Also, the larger purpose of this visit, the recalibration, if one may, of India's foreign policy at a time when traditional world powers are not clearly with us. The United States under Donald Trump is unpredictable, and Russia is siding with China on a lot of issues. Is Delhi then betting on Europe in its search for new strategic partners? And will the gamble pay off, more importantly? On Gravitas tonight, we bring you some answers to those questions as we also raise those questions. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. First up, the day's top headlines. A special CBI court grants bail to former Deputy Prime Minister L.K. Advani, BJP veteran Murli Manohar Joshi and Union Minister Uma Bharti along with 9 others in the Babri Masjid demolition case of 1992. A week before elections, the gloves are off. British Prime Minister Theresa May launches the strongest personal attack on Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, says he would be going quote-unquote alone and naked into Brexit talks. A day after its test missile landed in Japan's exclusive economic zone, a belligerent North Korea promises a bigger gift package, as it calls it, for the US. President Kim Jong-un oversees the test of a new ballistic missile. 6 killed, 500,000 people evacuated as Cyclone Mora makes landfall in Bangladesh. Strong winds and heavy rains continue to lash coastal areas across the country. Also on the show, our special focus: what would happen if India and China were to go to war today? Why are strategic experts wargaming? We'll get you the full story on Gravitas, and why the Riyadh summit for the so-called Arab NATO has dealt a major blow to Pakistan's foreign policy. All of that coming up ahead. But first, the Prime Minister's visit to Europe. Narendra Modi has wound up his deliberations in Berlin with German Chancellor Angela Merkel. The decks have been cleared for more cooperation in technology and defence, with 8 agreements signed. Here's a report.
Baywatch, featuring India's own Priyanka Chopra, is opening in Germany, and the actress was in Berlin to promote the film. In between, she took time out to call on Prime Minister Modi and tweeted about her meeting. Earlier in the day, it was all business for Modi. After a formal welcome from Chancellor Angela Merkel, the two leaders got together for their 4th intergovernmental dialogue, which lays out the strategic roadmap for the two countries. A major point of focus was the stalled free trade agreement between India and Germany.
पार्टनरशिप का महत्व दोनों देशों के लिए तो लाभ करता है ही है, लेकिन ये पार्टनरशिप वैश्विक संदर्भ में भी किस प्रकार से उपयोगी हो, उस दिशा में भी हमारी चिंतन की धारा रही है.
Wir haben darüber zum Beispiel auch im Zusammenhang jetzt mit dem europäisch-indischen Handelsabkommen gesprochen. Europa muss ein Akteur sein, der sich auch einmischt international, und das halte ich für ausgesprochen wichtig.
8 agreements were signed covering trade and investment, science and technology and defense cooperation. Trade currently stands at nearly $20 billion and is heavily weighted in favor of Germany. At a roundtable with German CEOs, Modi was briefed on various issues they faced in terms of investing or working in India. He made a strong push for greater German investment in India's infrastructure.
India is a big country. Hence, nothing is enough when it comes to development. We have many dreams. And the dreams are big. But we have short timeline. And this is your opportunity.
Modi is now in Spain for talks with Prime Minister Rajoy. This is the first visit by an Indian Prime Minister in 3 decades, and the focus could be on taking advantage of Spain's expertise in shipbuilding, radar and telecom equipment. Bureau Report, WION.
This is half an hour.
And joining me with more on this from Berlin, Daniel Dylan Biomer, foreign editor of the foreign desk at Die Welt, joining us from Berlin this evening. We also have Dr. Markus Pindur, federal correspondent at Deutschland Radio from Berlin. And in the studio with me, Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat. Good evening and thank you all for being with us here this evening. Ambassador Sajjanhar, let's begin with you. What is the big takeaway, according to you, from this visit to Germany in particular?
Well, several takeaways to begin with. I think, first of all, trade, investment, innovation. And that, the Prime Minister has tried to sell India to Germany, to the German business companies. Number two, a joint fight against terrorism, because terrorism is an issue that unites or should unite us, because all of us are afflicted by it. And I think the subtext, the hidden text is that it is the middle powers like India, Germany, what you said, reaching out. I will go a step further. I will say not only middle powers like India, Germany, France, but also others like Japan, like possibly Australia. They are getting together to see what they can possibly do together, because the big players, for instance, China becoming too assertive, too aggressive, hegemonistic, and particularly that was reflected, that was demonstrated very well at the Belt Road Forum. As far as President Trump is concerned, we have seen what happened in Saudi Arabia, what happened in Sicily, what happened at NATO. I think he's distracted, he's uncertain where it all of it is going, whether it is climate change, whether it is trade, protectionism, or it is NATO, or it is relations with Russia. And Russia, of course, as far as Syria is concerned, has become, much more active and assertive there. So, the big players are there. There's so much of, the shifts in geopolitical order that are taking place. So I think it is, this gives an opportunity to some of the middle powers like India to see what the other alliances and liaisons can be in terms of dealing and protecting their own interests.
Daniel, we were discussing about what was expected last evening. After the meeting today, do you see a redrawing of equations when it comes to geopolitics in the region? Did this meeting go beyond trade and technology?
Well, I would say that was at least what was signaled. And if I compare my predictions yesterday to the scenery that we saw today, I'm actually surprised how open things were named there. Both Angela Merkel and Narendra Modi took up the aspect of democracy. And in the world that we live in, adding to the shifting powers that the ambassador just named, I think we're also seeing a global rising tension between autocratic countries and leaders, even in the West, with autocratic tendencies. I think we all know who I'm talking about, and others who follow the path of liberal and parliamentary democracy. And both Narendra Modi and Angela Merkel stressed that Germany and India are united in that confrontation, and that for both of them, democracy is not only a moral question, but it is a question of stability. And I think the deals that they struck, relating to urban development, relating to the future of technology, relating also to the education in India, relate to that very well. And I think, it has shown how much business you can actually make from this development.
Dr. Pindur, how did you see the meetings and the outcome?
I would like to add a grain of salt to the expectation of a tectonic, big change, major change right now. Angela Merkel has put a fine point on it. She has said that Germany wants to develop its ties with India, but not should this be at the cost of its transatlantic relationship. So I think there is a gradual and maybe temporary shift. There is a shift, I agree, of course, and India and Germany have a strong point in common, a strong common interest. That is first, it's its free trade agenda. Germany is very happy that India is not going the way of protectionism, and Merkel wants to push the EU Commission to reinvigorate the negotiations on the EU-India trade agreement. And I'm pretty sure Chancellor Merkel also urged the Prime Minister to compromise somewhat on some of these issues. And there's a second point that is climate change. I think India and Germany are still committed on measures against climate change. And we should not forget that the development budget that Germany assured to India is 1 billion euro, meaning $1.2 billion per year from Germany to India, to invest in renewable energies, in technology of all sorts, in smart cities, and in exchange in science and technology, which has always been the pillar of Indian-German relations for decades now.
But do you see it going forward a step further? What about Germany's support on India's energy bid? What about defense ties between India and Germany? What about Germany speaking up on issues related to China, for instance, where it has business interests?
I think all German governments have been very reluctant to, somewhat let's say, to prioritize India over China and vice versa. They have remained an equidistance between them, and I think they will do that in the future too. Germany is more than willing to help India with defense. We have been selling ships to India, Navy ships, and we would have been very happy to sell our Eurofighter to India. India, for strategic reasons, decided to buy an American airplane. But I think there's still a lot of potential that is not being realized right now. And I think now is a window of opportunity for both powers, Germany and India, the middle powers, as the ambassador called them, to have progress on those issues.
Ambassador Sajjanar, your thoughts on this and how Germany's support, say for instance on the energy bid, is also largely iffy. How does India expect these countries to walk the extra mile when it comes to strategic partnership?
You know, a couple of thoughts here. As far as German support for India's membership of NSG, I don't think it is qualified in any way. I think it is an unqualified total support for India's membership. I don't think they have asked any questions, and there's full support. Now, how far can they go to influence? Because the only one roadblock that we see on India's march towards membership of NSG is China. So I think we have to see which are the countries which would really be in a position to influence China. You know, what was said that when in September 2008 you had the IAEA, the NSG unique waiver for India. At that time also China was the only country, there were others also which had questions, but China was the only country which was putting a roadblock, and that was the time when George Bush had picked up the telephone and spoken to Hu Jintao and requested him to remove the blockade from there, and that is how the unique waiver was accepted. Here people are saying, the United States should do the heavy lifting. I think at this moment the United States does not have the wherewithal and the clout, and there is a difference in leadership in China today with Xi Jinping there as compared to Hu Jintao. So there have been some reports which suggested that when the Prime Minister goes to Russia, then he is going to suggest, because of the proximity of relations there, and also because we are importing, Kudankulam 5 and 6, the contracts have yet not been signed. And one of the reasons why the contracts have yet not been signed is because we are not very certain of India's membership of the NSG. So we could request Russia, because that enjoys some clout with China. But coming back to the others, what I meant was that there are tectonic shifts in the global order. I do not mean to suggest that there is going to be a tectonic shift as far as relations between India and Germany are concerned. They have been moving gradually, step by step. And you know, when we speak about the middle powers, it doesn't mean that they are going to disengage or disassociate themselves from the other powers. You know, the closer, the stronger relations between India and Germany are not going to be at the expense of the United States. You know, we will continue to try and strengthen our relations with the United States. So will Germany do. So will Germany do with Britain, and we will do. So I think all these countries are trying to engage and re-engage with a large number of global players. But here at this moment, when there is so much of uncertainty around, then I think it makes sense for these countries to come together and try to see what is it that we can do together.
Right, we're saying that India is betting on Europe. The question is, does Germany see itself taking up that role? And here's an update for our viewers as well. It's not 8, it's now it turns out there are 12 agreements that the two countries signed while Prime Minister Modi was in Germany. Berlin, remember, wants to intensify its investment in the emerging superpower India. Germany wants India to take on global responsibilities, and from solar energy to engineering to even weapons and submarines, India wants to access superlative technology bearing the legendary stamp made in Germany. And yet, some influential German media concerns have kept up a stream of negative reporting on Prime Minister Modi in the months and weeks leading up to his visit to Berlin today. In fact, we have some of these headlines from the German press. Take a look at these. The Indian Trump reads one headline. Its strap reads, demonizing minorities, witch hunting the media, machismo. The Talibanization of India reads another headline to an 8-page story on Prime Minister Modi. Failure threatens the Modi experiment reads a third headline. And this is just a small sample. The content of the articles that follow reflect a bias too deep-rooted for the world's natural partners' meeting in Berlin to ignore. Sample these excerpts, and I'm quoting here. Modi belongs to an ultra-right-wing Hindu organization whose founder admired Nazi Germany. Or this. Narendra Modi exploited the 2G scam of 2010 and his birth as the son of a poor tea seller to his advantage. And the most puzzling of all, that the crux of an 8-page analysis of the Indian Prime Minister in one of the country's biggest broadcasting corporations is a meat patty. The reporter who authored it seems to incorrectly conclude that Modi's greatest failing is that a famous kebab shop has been forced to replace beef with lamb. Remember, ever since Prime Minister Modi came to office with a resounding victory in a fully transparent election in 2014, many German journalists have preferred to disregard India's democracy and its judiciary. They have kept up a smear campaign against the Prime Minister, all in the name of the human rights philosophy that their own post-World War II constitution has instilled them with. Is it another matter? It is rather another matter that there is hardly a negative utterance on information-censored China, Germany's most important trading partner. Admittedly, most Indians know very little about the Holocaust, and to the discomfort of German travelers, often declare that criminal Adolf Hitler was a great leader. To most Germans, India is a snake-infested country with fakirs, poverty, disease, famine and destitution. A greater pity that both Prime Minister Modi and Chancellor Merkel have avoided journalists determinedly. But by doing that, they're failing to seize an opportunity to introduce themselves to the public in the countries they visit. The Prime Minister of India did grant an interview to a German business daily ahead of today's visit. As for the German leadership, they do not talk to the foreign media, claim their media managers. Germany makes sophisticated weaponry and India is the world's largest buyer. The German defense manufacturing industry is in the doldrums, and big orders like a submarine deal India is considering could help enormously. But how can there be a two-phased relationship, we ask? Selling weapons and profiting from the sales on the one hand while lambasting India when those weapons are used against Maoist rebels who are believed, at least by such media reports, to be freedom fighters. How can Germany give elected Prime Minister Modi a gun salute when its people dismiss India's democracy and verdicts, even by its Supreme Court? That is the question we ask. Let me start with you, Daniel. The German media has made much of what is being called the beef ban. But there are, well, it is still being debated in India. There are millions of Hindus. Those who favor it say that there is the sentiment of a large majority to consider. The German Chancellor herself quoted German culture while banning the hijab. So there are parallels. Why this strong campaign against the Indian Prime Minister and the Indian leadership in the German press?
Well, actually, I wouldn't call it a campaign. All those headlines that you mentioned, I've read them myself, but still they are just a part of the picture, and they add to the overall very positive echo that the visit has had here. It is just customary for the German media, for every relation with other states, for every state guests that we receive here, to also highlight the problem. And the situation of minorities is something that is of concern to Germans, and which is, of course, also a matter of concern for German businesses who want to do trade with India. And I think for Germans, it's not unusual to see both sides to a politician and to a political situation. The fact that journalists here notice that communal tensions seem to be rising, at least in some parts of India, doesn't mean that they disregard the economic and political achievements of the Modi government. It's not a contradiction in itself. And if I might correct you on two things, there is no general hijab ban in Germany, and it's certainly not Angela Merkel who spelled it out. I mean, she is actually rather critical of forcing German culture on other people. So this was certainly not the intention of her talking about German culture. And to correct you also on China, China is being seen very critically here as well. But you have those, you have this media scenery where both things are happening. China is lauded for its economic achievements, but then again and again we have reports about human rights violations in China. And whenever a German politician is traveling to China, he can be sure, or she can be sure, to be asked by the German media, will she address human rights violations in China? Will she meet Chinese dissidents? And when she comes back, she'll be checked on that. And Angela Merkel herself has been rather courageous, receiving the Dalai Lama at her office, having made appointments with Chinese dissidents on her visits to Beijing, which were then forcefully stopped by Chinese authorities. So maybe that's something where Indians and Germans have to learn from each other, but we try to see the bad things but still see the good things, and to strike a balance between both. But absolutely, meat patties are not the only issue at stake in India, and we should look beyond that.
Good to hear you say that. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is somewhat reassuring, what has been mentioned, that you know, this is not the only narrative that is going around. I do recall that when the Prime Minister was visiting London in November 2015, if I remember correctly, then also there were a large number of papers who had also splashed this type of news. But then, you know, that was limited to only a limited number of newspapers.
This is a sideshow.
Yeah, this is a sideshow. I think the sort of a little bit of the baggage that unfortunately the Prime Minister carries, you know, that keeps resurfacing whenever he travels abroad. But then, you know, it is satisfying to see that much of the narrative is on the positives, on what India has been able to do, what India has been able to achieve, whether it's in the economy, and I think across the board also, you know, when we are talking about minorities, I think there is also, even if there is reporting, there should be balanced reporting, that in terms of seeing how the minorities find themselves very much at home. There are a large number of stories. Even the latest story, Palki, would be, you know, when this young girl, Uzma, she went across to Pakistan, and how the manner in which she was assaulted and she was tortured, and at gunpoint she was married, and then she came back here, and the sort of comments that she had to make about our Western neighbor. So I think minorities here across the board are living peacefully. Whenever there are instances of this nature, of violence or others, they are only an exception, a small exception, to prove the general rule that by and large the 1.2 1.25 billion people in India are living at peace and securely. But coming back to this, I think possibly more needs to be done, even if the Prime Ministers are not giving interviews to each other. I think nothing stops really our senior officials to go out and engage the media, because I think public perception in a democracy particularly, and when we are talking about the difference between India and China, India is so open, anyone can come and say anything, do anything, film anything, speak to anyone and sort of report that, although it might be a minuscule sort of a percentage of the people.
Right.
While in a country like China, of course, that's a closed society, there's very little. But I take the point that you were also making, India-German trade is barely about 17.5 billion euros, while China-Germany trade is 10 times that figure. So, whatever happens, whatever, even as far as the Belt Road initiative is concerned, the German representative might have said that as a result, because of transparency and sustainability and human rights issues, we will not sign that trade document. But I don't think that if there are opportunities that are coming out of China, that German government or German companies will be able to say no, because I think that is where action is taking place. That is where action is happening.
Right.
So I guess, but I think the response to that should be how both of them, there are two aspects that one could look at this. Number one is the bilateral trade and investment agreement between India and the European Union. We launched it in 2007. I was in Brussels at that time and Dr. Manmohan Singh was there. We said we'll conclude it in 2 years. Everyone knew that it was an ambitious target, but everyone thought it's better to have an ambitious target rather than to have sort of, too much time. But now 10 years have elapsed. And I think both these leaders, both of them have a control. Angela Merkel is going to go in for an election but as it looks, she might, as the other election results, local election results seem to suggest, that she might be having a positive outcome of that also. Both of them are strong leaders, and I think both of them really need to take a political call, demonstrate the political will to take the relationship between India and Europe forward.
I want to get in Marcus Pindur here. Dr. Pindur, when we are talking about deeper ties, strategic ties, trade ties, how much does this narrative, this very narrow-minded perception of India damage that?
You keep calling it a narrow-minded perception of India, which it really isn't. There isn't certainly no smear campaign against India. I don't see that in the German media. I've just recently in January been to India, and I've seen more critical statements about India in Indian newspapers, far more than in German newspapers. That's not the point, and I think that's beside the point. There's communal strife, there's ethnic tensions in India, nobody is going to deny that, and India is a country of 1.4 billion people. That happens. The role the Prime Minister decides to take within all that may not always be to what, human rights activists would like to see, but it remains to be seen how this all works out. What I'm concerned with, and what I would like to see, and I can only praise the ambassador for bringing this up, is that the full potential of Indian-German relations is not, as of today, not realized. And I'm looking forward to a day, probably not in the near future, when India and Germany's trade relations are as good and broad as Germany's and Chinese trade relations. But the perception of India, I can tell you that, in terms of the human rights and democracy issue, is really very good compared to China. China does not have a very good reputation in that respect in Germany, quite the opposite. And this is actually something that India should also always hint to and always work with. India is a strategic and natural partner of the West as a democratic country.
Right. My colleague Padma Rao, who has very strong views on this, is also joining us on the phone line. Padma?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes. What do you make of of the comments, the analysis, quote unquote, that has been published in the German press in the run-up to the Prime Minister's visit?
Well, I wouldn't call them representative of the entire German media, but I would certainly say that the ones that were quoted on the show come from three very prominent dailies. So, that does make a difference. In fact, one is represented in India, and one is has been represented in India for very, very many decades. So all the more surprising then that even those correspondents and reporters who have access to understanding the way Indians think or what is happening on the ground choose to filter the Indian media only through a certain kind of politically correct vision. Now, as far as this remark by Ms. Angela Merkel, Chancellor Angela Merkel is concerned, she certainly did say it. She said, she's in fact repeated it in a more recent interview. She said it at her. She first said it in August last year in interviews, and then she repeated it in December. Let's not forget this is election year. Many politicians are, compelled to saying things just for popular support. But she did say, and I'm repeating this in German: Aus meiner Sicht hat eine voll verschleierte Frau in Deutschland kaum eine Chance, sich zu integrieren. A fully, covered woman has hardly a chance to integrate in Germany. And on another occasion at the party conference, she has spoken of it being contrary to German culture. So that is the question, really. I see where the Chancellor is coming from on the one hand, but on the other hand, the way it is reflected in the German media, things like the beef patty that you mentioned or incidents like that, making them central to the larger question of the undoubtedly excellent and burgeoning relationship that Marcus touched upon. I find that very contrary and curious, contrarian and curious. And I find that, it's also time that the German media revs up its presence in the subcontinent, because there used to be, as Marcus would tell you and as Daniel can tell you, there used to be almost every single media concern was represented in India, had offices here, so they could actually, have a finger on the pulse of what's happening here. Most people have withdrawn, preferring to rely on internet reports or, just people passing through India as their reporters with absolutely no in-depth knowledge of this country. And Marcus and Daniel will surely agree that India is not exactly the easiest of countries for newcomers to comprehend fully.
Dr. Pindur, do you want to respond?
Padma here. That really is a problem. It's a problem that too many German media have decided to get rid of their correspondence in India. I think that is a problem. I would still contradict Padma on the issue of there being a lopsided perception of India in the German press. I don't think so. If I look in I can look in one newspaper and have a report on communal strife or ethnic tensions, and there are ethnic tensions. We all know that. And there is Hindu nationalism that poisons the well to some extent. And you could also have a very brilliant report about the Indian software industry built up and its success. So it's not that easy. India is seen in a mostly positive light in Germany, and especially compared to China. There is no doubt about that.
All right, I think I'll leave it at that. We're running out of time. Padma, Daniel, Dr. Marcus Pindur and Ambassador Sajanhar, thanks very much. As long as there is a healthy debate, I'm sure things should be fine. We're taking a break at this point on Gravitas. Still ahead on the show as Modi meets European leaders. We're also talking about the elephant in the room, China. What would happen if India and China had a military clash today?